All right, let's see if we're live here. All right, it's saying we're live, so I'm going to assume we are live. Hello, everyone. This is SMQ, and we have lead researcher Buster, 1978 here, and we are Team SMQAI. Buster, how is your day, your week, your month, your life, the whole nine yards? How you doing, man?
Good, very good. It's been so far pretty busy over the past couple of weeks. Hopefully everyone's enjoying the nice weather and lots of stuff going on behind the scenes. It seems lots of stuff going on in the scientific world with the quantum world, and hopefully everyone's just having a good summer, paying attention, just keeping it real.
Yeah, yeah, and I was told next week, Talk is Jericho. I'm pretty excited about that. If you guys want to check out that podcast, you can. I'll be on that for the UAP uh, confirmation process. We'll be talking about that next week. I don't know if it's going to be the Wednesday or the Friday episode of the podcast, but I just thought I would tell everybody in advance. I'm pretty excited for obvious reasons, and he's very interested in the subject, which and was very into it. So that made it a really great experience that I had on the podcast. And you should check out the podcast. He has a lot of really interesting guests and a lot of great topics too. Buster, it's pretty cool, man.
Yeah, definitely. I can't wait to check that out.
Yeah, yeah, I'm totally stoked. And it's Chris Jericho, if anybody doesn't know, and he's just really and he has a separate Twitter handle, which is Talk is Jericho from his regular Twitter, regular Twitter handle, which is I'm Jericho. So we're talking about two different Twitter handles. Specifically, the podcast is Talk is Jericho. So anyhow, so the title was meant to be provocative, but actually it's not clickbait. And also, too, by the way, I forgot. I don't know when he's going to announce it, but I did a talk yesterday on Illuminati Watcher with Isaac Weishaupt, and that was interesting too. And I know that it's over with his behind the paywall for now, and eventually that will go public as well. And we talked about all the new recent things going on that we've all been experiencing and talking about. So I had to get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way there, Buster. So you and we talked briefly about this. So the Mandela Effect as a form of government. What I threw out is the idea is imagine if the Mandela Effect, and a lot of this is speculation, but I think it needs to be said, and I would prefer this channel and with Buster and myself and the crew and all of you, we're the ones that actually are break ground on this because as far as I know, no one else has talked about this. But anyway, the Mandela Effect is a form of government. You could do some sort of like pre-crime thing, like in Minority Report. You could use it if it is man-made. You could use it to right wrongs. You could use it to change history. You could use it to change the outcome of legislative votes in an almost infinite number of ways. You could change it on any regulatory body. You can use it to change laws. You can make people never even exist, like sort of the whole Back to the Future thing. Only all of it is actually real and in real time. So, Buster, what are you thinking about this?
I think it brings up that famous one from the man from Torred, being a country
Mhm.
that never existed, and then all of a sudden he kind of disappeared. But I think there's lots of ideas to examine, lots of fascinating things to look at to see if they're a possibility. I know we briefly brought up before the show started was the idea of certain laws possibly changing without people being aware of it. So, luckily, to my knowledge, I was saying that not to my knowledge, there's been any laws that have been Mandela affected, but it's definitely something to at least think about, in my opinion, because all of a sudden, you never know. There could be laws that could change, and we wouldn't be aware of them. So, how would we know, right?
That's incredibly important. The only way that we would know is if lawyers start to get involved. And what we have so far, we have clinicians, we have doctors, we have pilots, and now we have IT and software people. And that's not to say that it's a linear progression of the Mandela effect. It could be a matter of people just coming out of the shadows and saying, look, I'm part of XYZ industry and this is changing. And And I think, Buster, we think it's fortunate, but perhaps there is a lawyer out there, and he or she maybe, they're not ready to talk about it, and they're not ready to share their suspicions, because ultimately, I think that's one of the final barriers before the Mandela effect starts to get incredibly serious. And you start to get into territories of governance, and you start to get into territories of the military and things like that, and you start to get into very, very sensitive ideas and topics. But if we were to and I see no reason why now that it's spread to software, and I have a working idea of how we can actually get a control group and try to see if we can make data change, or not, excuse me, if we can record the data changing. And I talked about using the blockchain versus regular relational database models, but I'm not going to get into that here. But Buster, if we get a lawyer that comes out, or a series of lawyers that come out and they start talking about this, I mean, it's gonna change everything, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, when we're talking lawyers, we're talking about people who've done the education work and they have to know their stuff. That's part of their profession. So just like a doctor or a scientist or a physicist or somebody like that, they have to know what they have to know, and it's not a question of whether they do or not. It's they have to know it. It's part of their job. So if there was a situation where they come across something which doesn't match up their memory, um, yeah, definitely it could be a Mandela effect. Whether or not that specific Mandela effect could be something major or minor or even negligible, but it's probably something which, at least, if we could even get somebody who's into that sort of field or does that sort of thing as a profession to come out and say, "Hey, yeah, I've noticed certain things that aren't lining up with what I remember," then that could be something we could at least investigate. Perhaps it has been happening and no one's brought it to anyone's attention yet. We don't know, right?
Right, exactly. Um, so this person who thinks that we're idiots and then he apologized, we're going to go ahead and get rid of him. If you think we're idiots, I don't understand the concept of going to a channel unless you're there to troll. Um, why would you even go to a channel? That you think people are idiots or whatever. It's very odd. And people who don't believe the Mandela effect, will it take all industries and have personal Mandela effects for them to, and obviously I think the answer is going to have to be, it's going to have to be yes.
Yeah,
It's going to have to be that.
and
Yeah.
I think the interview you did with Christopher from the NES, I think he brought up a good point where he was saying that certain Mandela effects will hit people harder than others, and sometimes it'll be something very obscure, but once that happens, they will just sort of really take notice. You can
Hmm.
dismiss a lot of information, but one specific thing is all it takes for that person to change their mind.
Right. Right. Right, exactly. So my idea about this is ultimately what you can talk about is, because I think in a lot of ways lawyers are more important than doctors, because doctors only deal with the sick. Lawyers are more important because they deal with the entire population, and they deal with um the government and governance, and it's okay, good, that person's leaving. All right, excellent. So, and that's what we're talking about. And I hate people who speak in bumper stickers. The easiest solution is usually the correct one. And it's like, stop being a cliche. Anyway, so the reason why lawyers would be more important in a way is because it would affect all of us, and it affects the way in which we interact with law enforcement. It affects the way in which we react with everybody, to from the very, our city council and our mayors, all the way up to prime ministers, presidents, monarchs, the whole thing. But Buster, what I was thinking as a new form of governance is you could have a star chamber of judges, and they would be aware of the Mandela effect. And what would happen is an issue would come up where they would be, assuming they would be in a safe spot, and they would see that an accident would happen or something like that, and it was made by law. And what they could do is decide whether or not to change the course of history and change, whomever enacted the course and created it and change whether or not they're late for work that day, whether or not he or she is, stuck in traffic or something more drastic. And then there could be a series of judges, and what you would inevitably have is that would be the ultimate form of government. It would be a kind of it would be over capitalism. It would be over communism. It would be the ultimate kind of interactive and postmodern kind of star chamber, and it would be a powerful form of government that would no longer be bound to linear time. Now, the thing with it is you would have to keep a completely chain of secret so that in order for the other economy to work. Now, if it got out that linear time and our idea of our labor and how we pay for our labor actually doesn't work the way it actually does, then there would be a total breakdown of the system. And I think if lawyers were to come out and we would get a rather sizable minority, let's say 10% of lawyers saying the Mandela effect is real, and they were able to show residue like we do for movies and things like that, I think, Buster, we would begin to see a broader set of the population take this seriously like they never have before.
Well, just to bring up a very interesting point is when we talk about the doctor, right?
Hmm.
So when we think back to what happened with the doctor specifically, um, with his specific case, he had to go to jail because of what happened. Now, it wasn't necessarily because of the fact that a specific law got changed, but biology, from what he could see, had changed, and he wasn't aware of all this other stuff that was happening. So, therefore, if the lawyers or the judge were familiar with the Mandela effect, perhaps he could have been saved from going to jail when he was probably not in the wrong, so to speak, from a certain perspective.
Hmm.
So it could work out better in a lot of ways. Just looking at it from that perspective, because you're able to look at things from a broader viewpoint, and you almost have like a form of government which is looking at laws almost like in a quantum state, right, where they could be either or at the
Hmm.
same time. So that's very like a very different way of looking at things from such a binary perspective. Either it's 0 or 1, it's true or false. Either they did it or they didn't do it.
So I would wonder though, what how it would almost then life itself would almost have to be a play, and then the way it would have to the way it would have to work, at least in the beginning, would be to not alter the system, and then to have some sort of governance body that would come in maybe afterwards and then ease us into that idea of superposition to everything we do. um I don't know. It's so strange an idea because it's something people have to start considering because we have the Mandela effect. We have it in medicine, we have it in software, we have it in, just so many industries now. We have it in film, we have it in everywhere. I do think eventually it will get into law. And if it does get into law, there's going to have to be a way in which, and eventually, then obviously, in a lot of ways, where it's already in the economy just by NECS, they're actually part of the economy. So in a lot of ways, it was sort of double trouble when the CEO was talking about that, and Chris Sinatra. And it's we're talking an economy and we're talking software. So we've already kind of stormed that hill. Now it's a matter of, and also too, why the law is so susceptible is its language. It's simply language. And if you're a believer of any of the Abrahamic religions, they've all been touched. Whether you believe in Torah, whether you believe in the Old and New Testament, and I'm starting to hear even Islam. People are saying that there have been changes there as well. So you're talking about more Abrahamic based religions, but it still all goes back to that language. So, you know, I don't see why I think perhaps now that we're talking it through, you and I, there's probably a good possibility that law has been. has been affected because it's just, pen on parchment.
Right. And maybe not at the stage where it's been affected directly, but perhaps maybe at least indirectly. And what I mean by that is uh, if we look back to the doctor and we think of certain cases where biology has been changed, it might not be too far off to consider a case where somebody might have used some DNA or something like that in a court case, and perhaps
Mm.
we there could be changes to DNA that we might not be aware of, and that could easily change the outcome of a certain situation that may or may not work out in someone's favor. So those types of things where not necessarily might be completely obvious at first glance, but when you start to at least kind of look at all the pieces and try to think of what's actually possible, that's not really that far fetched.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you accept, yeah, that's a great point. That's a very powerful point, and it's a very devastating and frightening point, because it could also be used as something that's punitive towards you, uh, towards you, not you, but towards anyone. Um, oh, Jeremy's being funny. It's just people misremember. I love that. I love it. I love it. I love this crew. I love it. I love that it's the same folks, man, that show up all the time. It's wonderful. Um, no, but it's yeah, it's absolutely going to have to be addressed, and in a lot of ways, I think it's almost like a foregone conclusion, and it's just a matter of the first lawyer to come out and say, okay, this law or whatever, and it doesn't have to be anything big, and that's the one thing I'm noticing. Minor things can have huge impacts, just like with our doctor, our friend. He was telling us the story, and it was something that was just mundane to him, and yet these changes that happen to the body, they had devastating effects on him. So, in a lot of ways, in a different circumstance, the scenario that you played out for us that was absolutely frightening has already, in a way, happened. And who knows how many doctors this has happened to. And they even after the sentence is over and they get out of prison, they dare not say that to anyone. Even so, the doctor that we have, though I was able to, and he trusted me to check up to see who he was and to check, his personal records, and I was allowed to do that because he trusted me. And no, anyone out there, when you come to me, I need to check it, but you can trust me. I will not. I will not reveal who you are. I will not. And I will take great pains to make sure that um, we could any way you want. You want a burner phone, you want encrypted messaging, however you want it, we can communicate. If you're a lawyer, if you're a judge, anything, you can communicate to me, and we can figure this thing out. As long as I can prove who you are, I will bring you on the show, and we will talk about it. And the great thing is, you can get a cross section of other professionals that are within their world, and they will come out, and other, let's say, medical professionals, I'll say, they have come out and they've cross-referenced what the doctor told me on air on this channel, and they said it's absolutely true.
Yeah,
Buster,
and
and, and
it's a good point that you bring up is that anonymity is definitely an important aspect of what we do here on this channel, and for ourselves and for any guests that we have on here. So, yeah, definitely a very good point to make.
and I just, for Chris Sinatra to came out the way he did was so bold and so powerful. And I looked at his LinkedIn page and everything, and his company's LinkedIn page, and it's just, I'm blown away. And it's a, I'd really tip the hat, and I really hope that others do that as well, either at the executive level or at the very, very high professional level, the top end professionals, the top 3 or 4% in the professional world. I hope they all come out, and because the sooner we face up to the reality of the situation, I think the sooner we can address it in a way that is pragmatic, and in a way that is that we can cope, because eventually it's going to get to the broader population. And a person is smart, but people aren't very smart. I give you Area 51, and it's just, you have someone who has an idea, and then it turns into just a really bad idea. Um, and I think that if we can get our arms around it with ideas like this, we really could. Because Buster, if this thing got out of control, I mean, there'd be no point. And really, you could. I mean, think about the stock market, the way things move. But with the Mandela effect, there's also positives to it. You can, in a way, somehow figure out a new scale in which we judge and we move and we use labor. And that would be sort of the fulcrum, because all of our governments, all of them are based on what kind of economy we use. And if we get the economy back in shape in terms of a Mandela effect economy, using some kind of like blockchain so the data stays consistent regardless of what shifts come in, we can stabilize the situation and we can stabilize the reality. And if we can do that, and if we have a new kind of Magna Carta, post Mandela effect Magna Carta, I think we can stabilize the situation fairly quickly.
Yeah, that's a very good point to make. Just from the time that we've been investigating the Mandela effect, I think it's quite obvious to most people who've been doing that for a while is that there's no sign of it slowing down. Things
Mm-hmm.
do seem to be ramping up.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, we've definitely seen changes to the past. So that right there should tell people something that there's probably going to be a time, or there will be a time, when this will spill over into the law enforcement side of things, just because of the fact that the past can change. So when you think of that, and you think of that, all of these laws that are based on things that are hundreds of years old, and then they get updated and updated. Yeah, absolutely. If the past changes and no one's paying attention and no one notices it, things might get out of control. So you bring up a good point about being able to catalog these things, using the idea of the blockchain to sort of notify ourselves of any possible discrepancies.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to do that, I think, would be a huge benefit.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that are going to be able to keep systems up and running. The blockchain will be able to keep the critical systems that you need to keep the lights on in order to keep dialysis machines running, to keep planes flying in the air, to keep and if anybody doesn't know, this is Buster talking, everybody, lead researcher extraordinaire for the channel, if anybody is wondering. But anyway, yeah, I think it's critical we have that first. So we have the system in place that's going to be able to handle the data, so systems don't crash. Now, what we need in place, if this ramps up and it starts to ramp up, is a form of governance. And the way we get the form of governance, if our laws are constantly changing, like it is happening in the Bible, like is happening in other ancient and older texts. What we'll need to do is decide, first and foremost, the most basic thing is the unit of labor and how that unit of labor starts, because that's the cornerstone of most governments, is figuring out the economy first. Because it really is, it's monarchs bow to dollars, tyrants had to bow to dollars, whoever it was in the world, they always had to get a loan. And that's because money, and the idea of money itself, is what gets nations to move. There's nothing else that will move a nation like money. And if anyone else thinks otherwise, please enlighten me why that isn't the case, because so far from what I've seen, it absolutely is the case. And if you ever want to read a book and you were wondering, read the book The Tower of Babel, and it will talk about the Bank of International Settlements, how while it was in Switzerland and the bombs were going off all around it, they were still making wire transfers between the Allied forces and the Axis forces, because they knew the underlying based, that unit of labor, if that were to get out of sorts, the economic, um, the economic sort of world would collapse. And then if that collapsed, then everything would stop. I mean, so there's something about having to do that, sort of make a bank of international settlements for the Mandela effect, something that can cross timelines. I don't know. I'm just throwing things out there.
It's definitely an interesting idea to consider, looking at aspects like that, because not many people would at least even think about things like that. And I like to think that at least on this channel, we try to at least examine ideas that, even if they haven't happened yet, there's a very good possibility that they might happen. And just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it won't happen. Um, Hopefully, things like this, where if it does spill over into that kind of category, hopefully we're at least prepared for it in some way.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be us. It could be somebody listening. I mean, for all we know, that this could be just somebody using this and going, okay, someone has talked about this before, and then someone in a more official capacity will be able to get their heads wrapped around this. It has to get out there in order for people to understand that this thing is happening. And though MEs and particularly, this channel and this community, people who understand these kinds of things, um, you know, we're trying to put down a foundation to answer all the questions before they happen. And even if it is in a hypothetical setting, that still matters. Like you were saying, that's important. That's incredibly important. And it's not a matter of trying to scare people or anything like that. It's a matter of trying to say, hey, here's the first spitball attempt of understanding the Mandela effect is real. More sections of life, the economy, and eventually got the government. It's being enveloped in this thing, and eventually it's going to have to be addressed. And I would not put it past this, whatever this thing is, whether it's natural, whether it's man-made, whether it can be man-made and not under control, or man-made and under control, whatever you however you want to put it. But if we have a change in someone's major laws, like in the US here, we have the Constitution. If we have a change even in one word that could change the Constitution, I mean, it could have massive, massive, massive ramifications for the entirety of how the country is governed. And, people need to think that through, how that's going to happen. And the thing about it is, and that will be the moment where a lot of people are going to have to sit down. A lot of people who are in positions of power are going to have to sit down and make some seriously hard choices, and they're going to have to make them immediately. Because once this, Buster, once this thing kind of invades a sector, it sort of tears it up until it's done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we already know that history can change. We know that geography can change. We know that biology can change. There's always all these new developments in science happening, especially in the quantum world in the past few months. And, it's one thing to say a movie line changed, but you made a very good point as what happens if one word or a line changes in something like a constitution or a very important Bill of Rights or a Charter of Rights or whatever it happens to be. That could have a massive impact on everybody in a nation on so many different levels. And it's
Right.
even if it hasn't happened yet, it's something to at least consider the possibility of.
Absolutely. And I think too, a lot of people, um, including me, until we started talking about this, I hadn't considered what next, what next, what next. And, this could be the what next. And, this could be the what next. And this could be the important part where, um, we have to almost in an instant have to restructure everything on the fly immediately. And I think that the first thing that will have to be addressed is, how do you price a unit of labor whenever you're no longer in the linear concept of time? How is it that we structure that labor, and how is it that we price that unit of labor? And because hourly now is a bit arbitrary, hourly doesn't mean a lot. Annually doesn't mean a lot, whether you have a fiscal budget or not. It because the entire budgetary process is based on calendar year or fiscal year. And if you're outside of that, and that no longer means anything, and it never even struck me, Buster, we talk about these scientific changes all the time, and we talk about these particle smashers. They're just popping up all over the place. We first had CERN, and suddenly we have hundreds of particle smashers in North America. And it's like, wait a minute, how did they get there? They got there through human labor. They got there through people. either whether or not it was on purpose or not, in our time, it was in a blink of an eye. And to the people at even CERN, going back to the 1950s, me personally, I've seen CERN's history change at least 3 or 4 different times. And now CERN has become a critical part of the foundation of modern computer science itself. And I remember taking a history of computer science class in college, and I don't remember that at all. CERN. I had to write a paper on it. I totally do not remember CERN being a part of that. I remember MIT. I remember DARPA. I remember Stanford. I do not remember that at all.
Yeah.
I don't even remember the Large Hadron Collider being mentioned in the history of information technology. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things to consider. I think what might trip up a few people, if they're new to the Mandela effect, or if they might not be completely sure that it's real or not. I know we bring up the idea of retrocausality. I believe we even had a couple of documents on it, which are definitely
Mhm.
worthwhile to read if people are not familiar with that term or what that is, because it definitely plays a part in the Mandela effect. So once you really understand what that idea is and how it's basically integrated into the Mandela effect and a huge part of it, then you sort of understand how these ideas can come about of what we're talking about, where things can literally change in an instant,
Mhm.
and how that could affect us in the future.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. Totally. Absolutely. So, all right. Oh, can we get some thumbs up, guys? If you don't mind, get some thumbs up in there. So, what do we? I mean, what do we do from here? Where do we go from here? Do we? Obviously, the invitation is still out there for any kind of lawyer or any kind of person that is in the law field.
Or
To come out from.
even law enforcement, people who are actively on duty, something like that. Anyone who might have had a different scenario where something doesn't match up to what they previously knew was true, and like that, it goes again with the whole retrocausality, things changing without your knowledge of it, and then all of a sudden it's not the way it used to be. So anyone who might be in that field, absolutely feel free to contact us and tell us your story.
Absolutely. Absolutely, that's critical. And, it can be something really minor, and hopefully it will be minor. And I know that with the geo changes and with the movie changes, with the history changes, uh, all in all, they've been massive, but all in all, there wasn't something major like a country never existing or a geo change where, suddenly France was in the middle of the Pacific. There wasn't anything like that. However, there was enough of the changes that are continuous that law is so fragile and it pivots on just one word. It's like the human body. The human body is so fragile that you can just change, like the doctor said, the chemistry and the molecular structure of the medicine. It hadn't changed. What had changed was the human body itself. So something that seemingly where humans are able to go on with maybe just a headache and ringing in their ears, they wake up and they're okay the next day. But suddenly, tons of doctors are going to jail because suddenly they've been over prescribing or under prescribing, or have been accused of some sort of malfeasance in their practice, and it wasn't their fault. With government and with laws and with lawmakers, it's double in terms of the delicacy, because it's very delicate because it affects all of us. It's not just a sick population, it's the entirety of the population. And I just really want people to think about that and that drive that home. And I really want people just to feel um I want them to feel as if, they're okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I do remember for me personally, just speaking, going back to the geography changes briefly. For me, the country of Svalbard never existed. That just sort of popped into reality for me. Um, so I mean, like things like that, where you can see a magnitude of a country that you never knew existed before, and you're absolutely certain, for me at least, it never existed and just sort of popped into existence. Um, things like that, where they can just sort of happen, and then all of a sudden there's a country there that you never knew. Absolutely, there could be same thing if that applies to the law enforcement field, where it's all of a sudden there's law that might just pop into existence that you never knew existed. We have to at least think of the idea and the implications of that. What could that
Right.
mean for us as a people, as a society, where things just sort of change without your knowledge, and that's sort of
Mm,
happening on a daily, weekly basis. And people are just maybe not exactly all aware of it, but some people are for sure.
absolutely. Hmm. All right. So I just wanted to get that out there. Kind of a short session. I'm getting called away for something, and I appreciate at the last minute everybody coming on, and Buster certainly. Thanks for coming on, man. And
Yeah,
I
not,
think
not a problem.
we had a good conversation here, and just putting that out there. And that's what it's all about, is trying to put something out there so people, if it happens, they have a reference point. If it doesn't happen, no big deal. No big deal. If it does, no big deal. But if it does, they might have a reference point and they have a place to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
And hopefully, if anyone's listening later on and they feel like contacting us, hopefully they can get a hold of you or me.
yeah, and that's just it. Get a hold of us, and you can trust us. And we've shown with the doctor, with the pilot, with clinicians, over and over again. Some of our other friends, we've stayed totally, to our word, and we'll stay to our word. We will never ever, expose you, or whatever. So
Yeah, our
anyway,
our main our main idea here is investigative journalism. We're trying to look at this through all that different aspects, and anyone who's in any kind of position to give us insight into their world and how the Mandela effect has affected them, we'd be glad to hear from them.
absolutely, absolutely. All right, guys, I got to get out of here. And Buster, thanks, man, for jumping on. And everybody, just give us those thumbs up. We really appreciate it, and tell your friends to check out this channel. So, all right, bye. All right, guys, see you later.
Bye.